Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Brian Browne. Brian is Chief Warrant Officer in the U.S. Navy, but more importantly, he's a submariner. He's also co-founder of Sailors and Sticks, a nationwide group of more than 1,300 sailors and former sailors who enjoy good cigars and great conversation. He co-hosts the popular Sailors and Sticks podcast, which is one of my absolute favorites. At the end of the day, Brian is an experienced hands-on leader, and I'm excited to have him on the show to talk about his philosophy on leadership. So Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I've been a fan of yours for a while. Been following the podcast and what you've been doing. So I appreciate you having me on board.
Yeah, and I've been following you as well. And I'm a member of the Sailors and Sticks community. So I enjoy, this is going to be fun for me to have you on my show. So, but first of all, I want to get started, talk a little bit about you and your career and how you ended up, where you're at. So why did you choose, I know you're from North Carolina, I'm here in North Carolina now. Why did you choose to become a submariner in the first place?
I think like most people, I was a high school guy. I didn't really know what was next for me. I came from a different type of background where college was the only thing that you were supposed to do. I didn't really find myself having that passion yet. So I actually, my accounting teacher, one of the classes I took when I was a senior, she brought in a Navy recruiter, and this guy was telling me like all the places he got to go and like the stuff he got to do as a job. And I was like, man, that sounds pretty cool. I'll do that. Went and took the test, ASVAB, obviously, scored pretty well. They offered me submarines, and I was like, well, I never done that before. It's funny because my dad's a big movie buff. And one of the first movies he took me to was Hunt for Red October.
Oh, wow.
And I fell asleep during it because I was like, I'm never going to have to worry about this anyway. This is stupid. And then I fell asleep. I was a young kid, obviously, not knowing what the hell was going on with my life. But turns out I was wrong because I ended up spending over half my adult life doing it. So,
wow.
Yeah, just pretty much I'm lucky to have found the Navy because I really didn't know what I was going to do after I graduated high school.
No, that's great. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting as I talk to many submariners, some have a similar story to yours, which is you sort of get offered this opportunity. You say, well, I've never even thought about that. And you go in that direction. And I know for myself, I had, growing up in the Cold War and seeing, and hearing stories of, this cat and mouse game between, the Soviets and the US forces. To me, that was just intriguing. And I actually wanted to go in this direction, but it's kind of funny. Everybody's motivated slightly differently. How you end up on a submarine in the middle of the ocean someplace.
Yeah, I was listening to the guys at Test Step, and they one thing that caught me with your interview said you were always fascinated about submarine warfare.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of cool because, like, for most of us, it was like a kind of afterthought once you get into what you're doing,
Yeah, yeah. Well, for me, it was always interesting, and it was kind of a dream of mine, and I actually got a chance to do it. So, yeah.
Awesome.
So we talked a little bit about it before we started, but you're a bit of a unicorn. So you're a submarine qualified warrant officer, and as I mentioned earlier when we talked earlier, is that I've never really ran into too many in my time in the Navy. So how did you end up on the warrant officer path, and then what's really the role of a warrant officer in the submarine Navy?
So it's interesting. I mean, like I talked about it a little earlier with you, is that I spent 17 years of my career as an enlisted guy. Started my career out in San Diego. My first boat out there, USS Bremerton, was on Bremerton and Key West out there. And then did some time on Miami, USS Miami, and then Dallas. And then my last boat was USS Virginia, which I was on. A lot of the stuff that they got you through as far as career-wise was, hey, you go be a chief on a boat, then you go be a cob, and then you go do so forth and so forth. It turns out when I was at Squadron, as a Squadron FT, there wasn't really in the cards for me to progress and go up and be a cob. Just it wasn't in like the chain as far as working your way up to be the next rank. And so I know if I was going to go back to a boat, I wasn't going to be able to do anything out of that static capacity, which I've already done. So I wanted a challenge. I wanted to do something new. My buddy, Josh Razor, who's also a submarine ordnance officer, actually put me on the program, and him and I talked about it. And I applied. And then when I got picked up, that took me off on another career path.
Oh, that's great. So, and we can't talk about too much what you do, but
Yeah, yeah.
you basically support the boats with respect to weapon systems or weapons, actually, right?
Yeah, so weapons handling, inspections, anything that we do for certification, we do when they before they deploy, we'll do certifications and things like that. So that was my job leading up to this point. Uh, One of the things that the community is the reason why you don't see too many of us. There's only like 23 of us in the Navy,
Oh, wow.
so that's why you haven't ran into many of them. I mean, when
So
you
you
see one,
truly are a
yeah,
unicorn.
yeah, exactly.
So,
So there's not many of us at all. We all know each other. It's a small community. So when you definitely see a warrant officer, it's probably it's a definitely rare thing because we're not all over the place.
right, right. Yeah. Well, like I said, I never really ran into, I'm trying to think at Squadron if I did, but I don't really even remember.
Yeah.
So, but, so let's talk a little bit about leadership. And, I get a feel for what kind of leader you are based on some of your posts and some of the things you put on social media. But one thing really stood out, and actually it turned out it was actually Veterans Day. I look back at it. You put a post on there, and it was a conversation or something that someone had written to you from one of the sailors that at one point worked for you, and I thought it was really powerful. And this is, I'm going to kind of read what he says. He said that you taught him a lot about, and I'll quote him here, leadership, ownership, and that leadership isn't just about being a hard ass and barking orders, but putting work into developing your men as better leaders and people inside and outside of the workplace. That was really powerful because I think when I talk why I have this podcast, why I write my books, why I do what I do is I want to make a world with better bosses, and that to me is the sign of a better boss. Trying to make, instead of being hard ass barking orders, you're actually trying to make people better, and that was really powerful. How did you feel when you saw that write up? I know you had put some things out there, and
It meant a lot to me because a lot of my sailors that aren't even out anymore or that aren't even in anymore, sorry, they still reach out to me and they tell me like, hey, I appreciate you doing these things, being involved in my career, whether regardless whether I'm still in the Navy or not. Uh, that I know that you actually cared about me and it wasn't like a front, that you weren't trying to be a fake leader, like, oh, I give a fuck about your career just because you're in. No, I want those guys to be successful whether they're in or they're out of the Navy. Like that's my job, is to make them better people than they are when they left. um,
yeah, and what I got from that post also is he said, when he was a junior sailor when you first met you. I think you were probably a chief at the time,
yep.
and he said something like, you didn't come around and just start barking orders and tell him what to do. You actually got to know him. You guys talked about music. You talked about where he was from. You got to know a person, and that's, I think that's missing a lot in leadership. People say, well, my rank, I'm a chief, and I don't know what he was at the time, maybe
I think
E3 or
at the time we were talking, it was like E5.
yeah. So, but then, you didn't, you could easily pull rank in the Navy, right? Say, well,
Right.
I'm a chief, you do what I say, but instead you got to know
So this guy was a CS, the guy who we're talking about. He lives in Tennessee right now. We still talk. Uh, Very smart kid, right? So like the common misconception about CSs is that they're not smart. This guy has a mechanical engineering degree.
him.
Like he's a brilliant guy. So very smart kid. Actually got out the Navy, but we still talk. I talked to him last week actually before I've been traveling. So I recently touched base with him. He's doing real well for himself, and I mean we still have a friendship that continues to this day, and that was over about 10 years, almost 10 years ago now.
Wow. Wow. So obviously I talk a lot about leadership making impact on lives, right? It's that pebble that drops in the water, and the impact that you have is wide, and you can be your impact can be positive or it can be negative, right? And
Yeah.
we've all had bosses that, have been quite, negative in our lives. Um, how would you, if you were to define your leadership style, well, how would you describe it?
I would say like I get involved. One thing that hit me when you talked about your uh, leadership and what you experienced was the situation you were in, and you said that guy was using that thing for a mallet and he had like worn it down, right? And I think a lot of us, I think a lot of people should listen to that, because I think a lot of us miss the mark is when we're not down on the actual deck plate, seeing how things go, right? We miss a lot of stuff that uh, people are just like, oh, it gets done, or this is too busy. We just overlook this, right? But once you're actually there, eyes on target, right? a lot of people act differently, they do things differently, or they bring things to you that, hey, this is a problem, and they know they haven't got it solved at their immediate level, right? So I think you have to be involved with your people. Like, you have to know their needs, wants, and desires, right? Those constantly things are changing, and the higher ranking you go, sometimes we lose sight of that.
Mm. Yeah, I find, I worked 22 years in corporate America, and I found that a lot of leaders ended up in a bubble, right? They were in and around other leaders, other senior managers, and they all had, this group think, right? Everything is great. They're only listening to the people in their bubble, and they didn't break out of those bubbles enough. And a lot of times you'd see corporate offices were away from the factories or away from where the value was added, and they all had this sort of, they never got out to where the people were to understand the challenges that they were facing. And throughout my entire career, I've always been either on a boat or in a factory. So I've always been around where the value is being added. And I did a little bit of time in an office, like 2 years, and I couldn't stand it. I had to get back to another factory. I had to get back to where the value is added. And I think that's a big problem, is that we get some leaders, and as you mentioned, the higher you go, the more you tend to get isolated.
You brought it up. One of the things that when I listened to your podcast too, as well, is they were talking about just like being surrounded by yes men, and how like people will always tell you what you want to hear, and you need people like that are gonna. I mean, I'm constantly known as bucking the system kind of guy, man. I'm not. I mean, if you look at me, I'm fully tattooed in the wardroom. Like, I'm not one of those guys who's gonna be quiet, and I feel like sometimes you have to be that guy because everybody's telling the boss what he wants to hear, but not always the truth, right?
Mm.
Sometimes it goes from this thing is not effective at all, and by the time it gets to the head guy, it's like, oh, well, it works sometimes, but the guys are okay with it. But they miss that mark in between where it goes between, hey, the sailors on the deck plate think this is a stupid idea, and it doesn't get it to the top guy because it gets filtered down so much. He never gets the truth.
Yeah. That is a problem. In fact, I think too, the other thing is I think weak leaders like to be surrounded by yes men. I
Yep.
think strong leaders want to hear other people's opinion. And I think that's really important, to be able to listen to the opinion of other people. I tend to want to ask, like, okay, what do you guys think? I'm leaning towards this direction. What do you think? What am I not seeing? And I want to hear people say, you don't want to go this way because of these reasons. I want to hear that. I want to hear that pushback. I want to understand. And sometimes as a leader, you have to say, well, thank you, but we are going that way, and these are my reasons, and what have you. So, but I
That
think
was
it's
the thing.
important to get that feedback.
That was the thing that I liked about being at Squadron, being at that level, is I had a lot of chiefs that were really seasoned and had done multiple tours, so they weren't afraid to tell me, they're like, "Sir, that's a stupid idea," or like they didn't hold back the punches, and I wanted that. Like, I wanted people to tell me like, "Hey, if I'm being dumb, let me know."
Mm.
So I appreciated that. I didn't. I had one guy that stands out in my head, Lance Gibba. He tells you like it is, man, and he doesn't care who you are, whether you're E1 or O10. Like, he's gonna tell you if something's dumb, and I like that. Like, the guy, he didn't have the most PC, but I needed people like that. I wanted somebody like that
Yeah.
that was telling me, hey, you're fucking up. Don't do it that way. We need to do it this way, and I love that about him.
Yeah, that's good. But you got to be strong to be able to take that kind of
Yeah.
feedback. And I think that what I've saw, in, at least in corporate America, is that sort of the weak leaders couldn't handle it. They didn't like people telling them the truth. They wanted them to just say what they wanted them to
Yeah.
say. So, so you mentioned a couple times. I really like this terminology. What do you mean by when you say deck plate? And I've heard the term used, deck plate leadership. What, in your mind, what does that mean?
Yeah, so it gets overused in the Navy, as we always tend to overuse a lot of things. But if you get to the root of the word, like the root of the words is like, you have to be on there, being involved. Being a leader doesn't mean sitting in the wardroom or sitting in the chief's quarters, hanging out with people that are only your type, right? Being a leader means you go down to the torpedo room, or you go down to the head where the guy's cleaning. You go do the stuff that they don't expect you to do, but you get involved with what they're going on. And like, I mean, for all you know, that problem sailor on board your boat's probably having issues with his family, and that's why he's acting out the way he is. But you might not know that if you don't leave your bubble, right? If you
Mm.
sit in your bubble where everybody's like you and you get along with them, and you don't go find out what's going on in the ship, you're never going to be that intrusive leadership we're trying to get to.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I was the guy that would sneak out during field day and actually help clean in the back. When I was the machinery division officer, I had the machines mates, and I'd go back there and just because I could spend time with them. So I would
Yeah.
just go back there because I always felt like it wasn't right that officers, we went out and trained and they went and cleaned the boat.
Well, I was telling my guys that it's worse watching somebody clean than it is actual cleaning. Like
yeah,
sitting there with trying to wheel a flashlight and like point stuff out. I'd rather just be doing it,
yeah,
and then that way it's like you don't have to sit there with your flashlight and look over all these spots. You just clean. Like it's easier for me.
right. Although I did have fun trying to find people sleeping during
Oh
field day.
yeah. Yeah, that's what helps being enlisted because you know all the sleeping spots. So I just find them all because I knew where I used to hide.
Right. I don't know if he's out there somewhere, but Petty Officer McKinney, he was great at finding the hiding spots. So I'd always find him. So, so you have on your social your links, and I've heard you mention it too, and a lot of people that talk to you on your podcast, they sometimes call you the People's Warrant, and I love that. And what do you mean by that by that title?
So I'm a wrestling fan, WWE guy. So People's Champ, obviously coined by The Rock, but I love it anyway. But I think that thing is I tend to look out for the guys when we talk about maintenance or anything that they're trying to do. When I'm on the ship, you often see me in cruise mess, eating with them, hanging out with those guys, finding out what's going on the ship. Because if you want to find out the tone of the ship, it's not talking to the CO, it's not talking to XO. Go find that E5 that's on board the boat, that guy, the normal everyday guy that's doing the job, and he'll tell you exactly what's going on that ship. Everybody else is trying to paint you these rose-colored glasses that you can look on board with, but you find that tempo about, hey, are the guys on cruise mess? Are they having a good time? Do they like being there? Or is everybody just going to rack, going to sleep because they hate the place?
Mm.
That's kind of where you get the tempo of the ship and find out exactly what's happening. I'm not a big fan of hanging out in spaces that everybody's like me. I want to get in touch with the sailors that are actually doing the work and putting that effort in all the time.
I love it. I always say you learn more in the break room than you do in the boardroom.
Oh,
I
yeah,
think
for
that's
sure.
very true. So, or the wardroom in that case,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, just curious. I mean, you did most of your career enlisted. You got up to senior chief, right, and then went over to warrant. Got your commission. How did you develop your leadership style? Did you have mentors? Did you have a leader that you looked up to, or leaders you looked up to that you wanted to emulate? Did you have some bad leaders that you said, well, I never want to be that way? I mean, how did your leadership style develop?
I'd never say the most instrumental person probably being involved in my transition to the wardroom. There's a lot of guys I look up to. The guy, Josh Razor, got me in this program. Guys like Nick Church, guys like Jason Pittman, those guys have made this transition a lot easier for me, being a guy, going to the wardroom and doing that kind of thing. Obviously, I've had some bad leaders, and I've talked to a lot of people about that. I use this analogy. It's kind of cheesy, but bear with me. I use leadership as like a toolbox, right? And so over the time you have a toolbox, you get in the Navy, it's empty, right? You don't know what anything is. And then over time you collect things, right? And you're like, oh, I like this. I'm going to use that for later on. And then for some things, you're just like, oh, well, I see the way he does things. I don't like that at all, so I'm never going to do that. And so you pick and choose what you keep in your toolbox and what you throw away. Those are a lot of things that I've experienced in being in the Navy 20 years plus now. I've been able to do that for a long period of time, so it's been able to help me, you know?
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of leaders. I open up their toolbox and all there is a hammer. So,
Right, exactly, yeah.
so
And that's bad too because, I mean, I'm not a yeller. I'm not a screamer. I probably count on maybe one or two hands the times I've had to yell at people. Captain Pittman likes to say it's a standard setting event, you know? Sometimes you got to do that. But usually if it's somebody like that or you're yelling, then they're like, damn, you pissed him off. He never yells. Like, then they know it's like, it's serious, right? Sometimes you got to use the disappointed dad talk. I mean, it all depends on what what you're dealing with,
Well, I think every person responds differently, right?
Yeah.
So I think you use what tools work on that individual, and I think each person's led differently. So
What do you
what
think works best for you?
yeah, probably the more disappointed dad. I've been more like that. Although I would have to say I was a bit of a hothead when I was in the Navy. So I had a I've calmed down over the years. I've gotten a little more relaxed. But I did I did chew out a sailor one time for not. He was working near the reactor compartment. He didn't have his TLD on. He'd taken his belt off, and I kind of got a little heated with him. I feel bad about that even to today.
Well, that's a
It could have
bad
just
thing.
been a conversation, but anyways,
That's
I'm much
probably
better
bad.
now. Much more of a calm leader than I was back then. Um, so as we talked a little bit about leadership. What would you say some characteristics of a great leader are?
A couple of words stick out to me. Like empathy is one. Um, the reason why I say that is because it's like we talked about earlier, is a lot of people lose that the higher ranking they go, right? So we all like to think that we're perfect sailors when we were junior and that we never made mistakes. And we don't have empathy for junior sailors that make mistakes and that are going through the ranks trying to accomplish what we did. So I think empathy is one. You got to have empathy for those guys screwing up. They make mistakes. Sometimes those guys do deserve a captain's mask, but sometimes they don't, So you have to find that balance. Humility is one. One thing that sticks out to me is I've seen situations where senior leaders aren't humble. They'll get junior sailors that'll want to come talk to them and just unload on them. Sometimes you just got to be a listening board, right? And just sit there and let somebody unload on you. But then they turn that conversation around and they'll make it all about themselves, right?
Mm.
So a lot of senior guys will be like, oh yeah, this was my situation. I was like, that's not what that guy wanted. He wanted to talk to you. He just wanted you to listen.
Mm.
And so humility is something I don't think that we have sometimes. I think we need to experience that and be like, hey, this person wanted me to listen to their problems. I just need to listen. And if they want to answer, then they'll ask. But sometimes just people just want to vent, man.
Mm.
And I think we just want to make the conversation all about ourselves instead of hearing what the other person has to say. And then the third thing I said is courage. And that's courage is not just like, hey, I'm running into this fire or I'm running into this firefight. It means when you see things that are going badly, it's like you said, in that room full of yes men, are you going to be that guy that says, hey, this is not a good idea? And a lot of people are more worried about putting on the next rank than they are about saying the things that need to be said. So oh, I don't want to piss my boss off, instead of just helping them out and telling them the right answer,
I like that courage to stand up, not so much running into a fire like you said, but a courage to stand up and say when things are wrong and they need to be corrected. I think you're right. I think at least from my observation from the corporate world is a lot of people live in fear. They live in fear of being fired or not being promoted or worried about that next rung on the ladder. And so they will not have courage. They won't stand up. They'll just, oh, that's what you want me to do? Okay, I'll go do it, because they want to get that promotion. They want to get that next pay raise. And I think, I always say that corporate America is very soul sucking. You feel, you really feel like you can't be yourself. Everyone is just sort of, I don't know, playing the game, and
Right.
it's not good. It's
Yeah.
not good for the long term. I did 22 years, and I probably did about 20 years too many. So
I'll be honest with you, the Navy, when it comes to wardroom or senior type leadership, it's turned into that though. It's the
mm,
kind of similar kind of thing. It's not, hey, you're speaking out for what's right. It's like you're bucking the system, and then people are gonna oh man, I think the same thing as you, and they'll tell you behind the scenes that they agree with you, but they won't do it when it comes time to it, because they're like, dude, you're a better man than me. I don't know if I would have said that, but I'm like, aren't we all supposed to do that? That's
yeah.
what it's supposed to be. If you look at the Navy core values and you talk about honor, courage, and commitment, it talks about courage, and it talks about even when it facing adversity, you're supposed to do that. And
Hmm.
so it doesn't mean it when it's convenient. It means it all the time.
Love it. That's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my you'll love this story when in my next book coming out. I tell the story about as an '01, I questioned an '06 in the control room. So
Yeah.
he was wrong, and
Yeah.
I had to bring it up. But I got a chance to go down to his stateroom and get a talking to
That must have
afterwards.
been fun. That must have been fun.
So it's a good story. Actually, he was an amazing captain, Captain Moore,
Okay.
and
Yeah. I remember you talking about that on the Midwest
yeah,
podcast.
so he's an amazing guy, and so turns out he was just an incredible mentor to me. But that was our first interaction, was me questioning something he did. So,
Yeah.
but not a good idea to do as an '01. So
Yeah. I did that. I did that when I was an E7 to a '06, and it didn't go well for me. But I mean, I still stood my ground. I wasn't backing down. I told him he was wrong, and he didn't like I told him he was wrong in front of everybody. I was like, but you're telling everybody this wrong information. And
mm.
it was about torpedo stuff. So that was my stuff. So I was like,
Oh, you
no.
knew that? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't care where you are as I don't know if you're '06 or '05. You don't know as much about torpedoes as you would know. So I wouldn't question that. So let's talk a little bit about sailors and sticks. I think this is great. Uh, I don't even know how or when it got started, but tell us a little bit about when you started, why you started, and what was the whole purpose behind it. Because what I've seen is it's just growing and growing and growing, and I think it's more than 1,300 members. I don't even know the right number if that's right, but
I got a buddy of mine. He messaged me the other day. He's like, man, I wish my stock portfolio looked like your group messages, like as
it's
far as like,
crazy.
membership. Yeah, it's nuts, man. Like I didn't expect it to take off like it would. Uh, so a buddy of mine, Nick Church, and I, we started it. Nick and I are really close. We hang out a lot. We used to go over to his house or go to lounges and smoke and hang out and just shoot the shit, normal submariner stuff. And he brought it up and like we talked about it. And he's like, we should do this for a group of people. And I was like, well, yeah, we're all sailors. And then he called cigar sticks, and I was like, he was like, yeah, we should call it sailors and sticks. And I was like, that sounds good to me. And it kind of started off as this little Facebook group, and like we didn't do anything with it for almost a year. I'll be honest with you. It kind of sat there. It maybe had like 20 people in it, and we'd like talk about it and do certain stuff. And then so I reached out to my tattoo artist who's tattooed Nick and I both now. And she was like, yeah, I'll do you guys a logo. And then once we got the logo, I think it kind of took off from there because we had like an identifier and things like that. And so people were identified, and then we just honestly just came out doing t-shirts, hats. But I mean, the background behind it is more like a mental health thing for a lot of us. Is like it gives us a place to bond, gives that connection to people that are out, the connection to the people that are out that are still in. It's just in a world full of negativity, it creates that positive environment just for all of us to get together and do good stuff. The thing we did for the USO raised $10,000 for them.
That's
The Von
amazing.
Hummer Shard guys. We've just done meetups, just different locations, guys that hanging out, guys that normally wouldn't have a place to go or people to bond with. They have that now because of the group. So it's kind of taken on a mind of its own. Like people are just interactive with it, and I love it. So it's a positive thing, and I hope it keeps growing.
I think it is, and I know for me, at least personally, having been out of the Navy a long time, I've always missed that camaraderie of the crew, the ship, the times off the boat, there was a bond that was something special, and you really don't have that once you leave the service. It's just hard to, have that connection. And for me, at least, I feel even, just being part of it just feels like I'm, back on the boat again. I've got a crew again. I've got, and listening to your podcast as well, it just cracks me up. I can't stop laughing. I'm listening to you guys having the conversations because it's exactly the conversations you have when you're
Right.
standing these long watches and you're, making holes in the ocean, not really doing
Yeah.
too much.
Yeah.
And everything, there's no limit to where the conversation goes. And that's
No, I mean, and that's the best thing about it is, and in that group, I don't remember what's the game called? 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon or 5 Degrees, whatever that game is called. Like this group is like that. It's like, oh, this guy, I know this guy, and so like we've connected so many people that haven't talked to each other in years, and they're like, oh, I didn't know you remember this group, or like somebody messaged me because they were smoking and grotting in the smoke pit, and some guy had a Sailors and Sticks like patch on, and they were like, "Oh, you know that guy?" And then like it's just really connected a lot of people that have lost touch with each other. So I love that kind of stuff, man.
Yeah.
That stuff brings like a warming to my heart, even though it's cold. It brings a warming to my heart to hear it. Like that stuff's awesome. I like it.
I love it. I think it's great. And the podcast too. I mean, that's kind of an extension of the group, and just hearing, you guys having those conversations is it's really good. And you've gotten a chance to meet up with a number of different cigar manufacturers, people who are
Yep.
marketing cigars, cigar shops. It's kind of neat. I'm sure it's probably surprised you the kind of guests you've had on.
Yeah. So we've had one guy, and you should probably have him on your show too, Mike. He does Pale Horse coffee and cigars. He's a great, like, I swear to God, that guy is a cigar like nerd. He knows everything, like everything when it comes to cigars. And I mean nerd in a positive way. Like that guy he's high energy, but he knows a lot about everything. And he was a former Coastie, but very solid guy. Does a coffee and cigar business, and he's definitely cranking along, man. And like he's one of our most memorable guests we've had because he just taught Nick and I a lot of stuff. And not to mention, like, he found out we were doing this, and he was like, "Hey, I got all this audio equipment that I'm not using. Do you guys want it?" He just gave it to us. And it was like, it was just nothing, but it was like for him to do that was a big deal to Nick and I, because we're dealing with iPhone and like a mic that we bought off Amazon. So I mean, it's bare bones, and as well as nobody's funding this business but us. So
Right, exactly.
yeah.
Well, I love it, and I did go out and get some Pale Horse cigars after that episode, and I
Yeah.
enjoyed them. So I think I
They're
probably
good.
have a few more in the humidor. So
It's a really solid. He makes a solid stick, man, and that stuff. He blends his own. He blends his own blend, and they sell it out of this coffee shop too. So yeah, he's definitely a guy you want to pick his brain if you're talking about anything bourbon, cigars related. That guy knows his stuff, man.
okay, good. Well, I wrote it down, so I need to hook up with them. So
Yeah.
that's great. So what's been the response so far? Like as you've done the podcast, have you had the meetups, as you run the Facebook group? What type of feedback have you had from maybe people who are active duty, people that are have been retired or have left the Navy like myself?
So we talked a little about earlier, but the big thing when I talked to everybody about what they like about the group, it was like it was kind of our space to just be us, and there wasn't like any like political stuff. There was no like that kind of stuff in the group. It was just like, hey, bourbon, cigars, sea stories, that kind of thing. And with everything on social media being so like divided and everything else, it was just a nice place for everybody to get together that we're all sailors, and we just all get along for certain things, and we all like certain cigars. We like bourbon, we like whiskey, and it was just a place for us to meet up. And the positive thing about the response has just been great. I mean, you see everybody got together to give me a tramp stamp tattoo, so that was
I did contribute to that, by the way. I had
that was
to.
phenomenal. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I had to be a part of that.
I know. And I mean, I appreciate it, but like there were people messaging me like, send me the link. And I was like, I'm not sending you the link. I don't want to get this. So like, I'm not going to help you with this endeavor. Like you have to ask Nick. I'm not helping you in this problem at all. Like if you can't find it, that's good for me because I'm not getting it if you guys don't raise the money. But I mean,
I loved it, and I mean, that's part of the fun of
yeah.
what you guys are doing, and I not only did they raise the money, you did it, and you put photos online, and it just kind of cracked me up. So
the lady who did it was my tattoo artist who did the logo for us. Like there were literally tattoo artists coming in and out of there, like, "Hey man, I heard you lost a bet," and I was like, "Yeah," and they're like, "Can I see it?" And she was like doing it, and they were like, "That's hilarious," and I was like, "Yeah, I'm glad my bet could be your source of humor. Like I'm glad."
yeah.
Yeah.
But you went through with it. That's some
Yeah,
guys
man.
wouldn't. So yeah.
Most people told me they would. Most people messaged me. They're like, "Dude, I wouldn't have done that." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm a man of my word. I'm not going to back out of it. I'm going to do it, but it's not my favorite tattoo, if that's what you're asking.
Wow. Well, it's funny. My son, as I mentioned earlier before the show, he leaves for the Navy in 2 weeks for
Yeah.
going up to Great Lakes for boot camp, and we've been talking about tattoos, and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to get tattoo. I'm going to, well, take it easy, one day at a time. Don't get loaded up
Does
in
he
the
have any
first
now?
days." No, he doesn't have any right now. So
Yeah, I would stress to him as a parent, like, make sure like you decide what you want. Like, I mean, so for me, right? Like, everybody sees me and like I'm literally tattooed all everywhere, but like they forget the fact that I have a 20+ year career in doing what
right,
I've been doing, right? So like a lot of people go tattoo their whole body. I'm like, dude, you haven't even done this for a long time. And like,
right,
I mean, for a lot of people, they call them like job stoppers when they tattoo their hand, but I'm like, I have a career in the Navy. So if you don't have that, I would strongly suggest not to go down that path that early if you're not, this is not what you're going to do.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Well, we've had some fun conversation. We'll see what happens. So, well, so what's next for you? What's next for Sailors and Sticks? What's going on in your life?
Um, so for me, I've been traveling a lot actually. I mean, I use that hashtag travel harder than me because I do travel all the time. I spent the last month and some change, with my wife up in Oregon. Been doing that. It was I, I love that place, man. It's beautiful up there. So much places to go, walking, hiking. Great outdoors place. Even found a cigar shop owned by a Navy guy. Um, so he served on the battleship USS Missouri.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he owns a cigar shop in Oregon. So I randomly ran into him. I would smoke there every week, hang out there. Uh, did that. Right now, I'm doing the quarantine thing, and then trying to figure out what's going to happen to me next out there. Honestly, it's kind of like unknown, but doing the COVID protocols as we speak. And
Okay.
then for Sails and Sticks, Nick and I have been talking. Uh, I'm trying to do something here on the West Coast for us. Now that I'll be out here on this side of the world, and then he's going to do the East Coast thing. But we're just trying to branch everybody together because I know, obviously, being out of Virginia where we were, most of our crowd is there. But I'm trying to make this a nationwide, even a worldwide thing as we keep going on, because I think it's good for a lot of the sailors that are involved in it.
I think it's going to continue to grow. I think once you get over there and get settled and people hear about you, I think it's going to keep growing because I think it's at least for me, I was naturally attracted to it. I mean, I like bourbon, I like cigars. And I'm a former, submariner. So why would I
Uh,
not hang out with you guys?
a question I like for you. What would you like to see from our group? Like, if we're not doing it, if we are doing it, what would you like to see more of? Um, what kind
Yeah,
of things?
I really did like. I think you did a joint podcast with the Test Step guys. I thought that was a lot of fun. You had like prizes and it was sort of live. You did a live Instagram and people were commenting and it was sort of like all the characters we had heard from previous shows were online. I think Jason was online. People were commenting. That was a lot of fun. I really felt like that I almost felt like I was part of that, even though I was just really watching it. I was on my back porch. I had a bourbon and a cigar, and I felt like I kind of was in the room with you guys. So I think those live events are kind of fun. I mean, not all the time, but I thought that was really good because you
Yeah,
could.
so I'm more of a by the seat of the pants guy, and Nick was freaking out about that because he was like, "Are we sure we got this?" And I was like, "It's probably gonna be fucked up, man." Like, I was like, "Let's just wing it. We'll see what happens." He was like, "I don't like that," and I was like, "Well, let's just do it, man. It's fine." And he's like, "You're always just so like, let's do it, whatever." And I was like, "Yeah, man, it's good." And like, so me and Ellison were talking about it, and like, we figured it out, man. But I think people appreciate content regardless of whether it's perfect or not. Like, we made an effort. We tried. Are there some things that we could have done better? Yeah, the echo sucked. There were a bunch of shit that was fucked up. But you know what? Like, we put something out and the guys were like, hey, these guys are getting involved. And then they raised money for me to get a tramp stamp. So there was all
I think everything about that was really
yeah,
good. I mean,
yeah.
I think keep the podcast going. I really enjoy that, but I think those live events occasionally are fun. For guys like me who are not really connected with that world, and we can just sit and have a cigar, drink some bourbon, listening to you guys kind of. And you know what? The number one podcast in America is not scripted, so I
Right.
think that's okay. It's okay
No,
not
I
to have a
agree.
plan. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I jotted down some notes from this, but like, I don't want to be a scripted thing. I mean, sometimes you go off on tangents, and sometimes that makes the whole thing better, you know?
Right, exactly.
So,
Yeah. But I just don't have Jamie to bring it up
yeah.
just need a Jamie.
Yeah.
So, well, very good. This has been a lot of fun, Brian. I really appreciate you being on the show and sharing your story, your wisdom, and I just encourage you to keep things up with the Sailors and Sticks. I really think it's great, and keep doing what you're doing. I think it's great to hear from someone who cares about people and getting down to that deck plate level and really treating people with respect and understand where the best ideas come from, not the wardroom but in the cruise mess and being with the people and that E5 like you mentioned, really checking and making sure the mood of what's happening. So really thought that was powerful stuff.
No, I appreciate you having me. This means a lot to be invited on somebody's podcast, what their platform is. I mean, because I know what you represent. So I appreciate events like this, and I just want to continue to go forth and do good things. The Navy is a big, evolving machine, and I think a lot of people realize, like you talked about, the impact that you make is big. If you continue to do that, whatever command or whatever place you show up to, it's always going to have an effect, but you have to realize your impact. And I think a lot of people don't realize their individual impact, that they can do that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we can all think back of the leaders that we work for, and some have left a positive impact on us, and some have left a negative impact. But whatever, we're always leaving impact, right? As
Right.
leaders, we're always impacting people. And I choose to make a positive impact. Sounds like you're trying to do the same thing.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, you have to do that. I mean, I think when it comes to what we do, no matter whether it's in the military or it's in the corporate world, is that um, you can motivate with a lot of positive reinforcement better than you can with negative. Um, a lot of people, nobody shows up to their job saying, "Hey, I want to do this job the worst time I can ever do it. Like, I want to be
Mm.
bad at what I do." But over time, they get jaded through things. They get jaded at a command, and so you always want to be that person that's like, "Hey, man," like, that takes care of them and positive reinforces them in a good way. I think
Yeah,
that's a good thing.
I agree 100%. That's great. Well, thanks, Brian, and thank you for being on the show, and really appreciate you being here.
All right, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.